The trick is a used piece of filter sponge from somebody else's aquarium. That is the whole thing. A squeezed out chunk of mature filter foam or a cup of established substrate carried home wet in a bag of tank water and dropped into your filter. It costs nothing. Most fish clubs will hand you one. Most experienced hobbyists will give you one if you ask. And a good number of independent fish stores will cut you a piece off their sump sponge for free if you buy something small. That single piece of foam does the job that the shelf sells you in a bottle for between $20 and $45. And the full cycling package most beginners get talked into on a first tank comes to about $43 once you add the bacteria, the detoxifier, and the starter kit together. But the sponge is not the interesting part of this video. The interesting part is what has actually been inside those bottles. Because for a long stretch of this industry's history, the bacteria named on the label were the wrong organism entirely. And that is not an accusation, it is a documented scientific correction. Here is the sequence almost everybody has been through with a new tank. You set it up. Somebody at the counter tells you that with the bottled bacteria, you can add fish the same day, and the bottle broadly agrees, because that is the entire selling proposition. So you buy it, you pour it in, and you buy your fish on the same trip because you have driven all the way there. Day 3, the water goes cloudy and white. Somebody tells you that is the bacteria establishing, which sounds right, so you wait. Day 5, it clears, and you take that as confirmation the product worked. Day 8, a fish is sitting at the surface gasping. Day 10-1 is dead. You test the water and the ammonia reading is off the chart, so you do an emergency water change and buy a second bottle, because the obvious conclusion is that one bottle was not enough. 3 weeks and 2 more dead fish later, the tank finally settles down on its own, and you never find out that it settled down in spite of what you bought rather than because of it. Put a figure on it. The bottled bacteria for one new tank is $20 to $45, and almost nobody buys just one. The ammonia detoxifier bought in the panic is another $10 to $20. The fish that die during that first month are $30 to $80 depending on what you chose. And if you set up a second tank a year later, which most people do, the whole sequence repeats from the beginning. The piece of sponge that would have replaced every part of it costs nothing at all and takes one message to a local fish group to obtain. And the same sequence repeats for every person who walks into that store on a Saturday afternoon with an empty tank at home, which is a considerable number of people, spending a considerable amount of money on a category of product that a piece of used foam outperforms. The label on those bottles is worth examining, because there is a genuine and well-documented scientific story behind it. For decades, the accepted understanding was that the bacterium responsible for converting nitrite into nitrate in freshwater aquariums was Nitrobacter. That belief did not come from aquarium research. It was carried across from soil science and wastewater treatment literature, where Nitrobacter is genuinely important, and it was repeated in textbooks and hobby manuals for years without anybody testing whether it applied to a glass box in a living room. Then in the late 1990s, a microbiologist named Timothy Hovanec used genetic sequencing to identify what was actually growing in freshwater aquarium filters, published the work in peer-reviewed microbiology literature, and found that the dominant nitrite oxidizer was not Nitrobacter at all. It was Nitrospira, a different genus entirely. An entire product category had been formulated around the wrong organism. And to this day, you can pick up bottles on a shelf that still list Nitrobacter on the ingredients panel. There is a second problem with what is in the bottle, and it is about the shelf rather than the science. Nitrifying bacteria are difficult to keep alive in a sealed container. They require oxygen, they grow slowly, and they do not form the protective spores that let some bacteria survive years of storage. A bottle sitting in a warm stockroom for 18 months is a genuinely hostile environment for them. Some manufacturers have solved this properly, and their products contain viable nitrifiers. Others sell bottles built around heterotrophic spore-forming species, which survive storage brilliantly and consume dissolved organic waste, and which are not nitrifying bacteria and do not convert ammonia. Those are the products that produce the white bacterial cloud on day 3, which looks convincing and is not the cycle. That is not a scandal, and almost every consumer category on Earth does the same thing. What matters is that a beginner cannot tell the difference from the outside of the bottle, and the visible result of the wrong product looks more like success than the correct one does. Before I get into the mechanism, one thing worth saying now. Cycling is one part of setting a tank up correctly, and the stocking order, the filtration, and the feeding in those first weeks all decide whether it holds. I have put the complete version together in one place as a full aquarium playbook, covering how every layer supports the others. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment, and if the code is on your screen right now, you can scan it and go straight there. Now here's what is actually happening, and it starts with what these organisms are. Nitrifying bacteria are chemolithoautotrophs, which means they take their energy from oxidizing inorganic chemistry rather than from eating organic matter, and they build their bodies from dissolved carbon dioxide rather than from food. Ammonia is converted to nitrite primarily by Nitrosomonas and its relatives. Nitrite is converted to nitrate primarily by Nitrospira. Both steps require oxygen, both require carbonate in the water, and both are performed by organisms that grow extraordinarily slowly. A common gut bacterium can double its population in around 20 minutes under good conditions. A nitrifying bacterium takes somewhere between 10 and 24 hours to do the same thing. That single fact is the reason cycling a tank takes weeks rather than an afternoon. And no product can shortcut a doubling time, because the doubling time is a property of the organism. The second thing that matters is where they live. Nitrifying bacteria are not free-floating organisms drifting in your water. They attach to surfaces and build biofilm, and the overwhelming majority of the colony in any aquarium is fixed to filter media, substrate, hardscape, and glass, rather than suspended in the water column. That is precisely why a piece of used sponge is such an effective transfer. You are not moving a liquid containing some bacteria. You are moving the actual established colony attached to the surface it already colonized, in the biofilm it already built, at full working density. A bottle has to persuade suspended organisms to find a surface and settle. A sponge arrives with the surface included. If you have ever squeezed an old filter sponge out into a bucket and watched the water turn dark brown within seconds, you have already held the thing these bottles are trying to sell you. That brown material is not dirt in any meaningful sense. It is biofilm, which is a dense living matrix of bacteria bound together in the substances they secrete to anchor themselves, and the sponge is simply the scaffold it grew on. The reason experienced fish keepers become protective about their old filter media, and the reason they will tell you never to rinse it under the tap, is that they understand they are looking at an organism rather than at a dirty piece of foam. A new sponge is a building site. An old one is a functioning city, and you can carry a piece of it across town in a sandwich bag. And here's the part that reframes the entire product category. The size of your bacterial colony is not determined by how many bacteria you add. It is determined by how much ammonia your tank produces. Bacteria are livestock, and ammonia is their feed, and a population cannot exceed its food supply for more than a few days. Add 10 times the bacteria your bioload can support, and you do not get a stronger filter, you get a die-off back to the level your ammonia sustains. This means that no bottle, however good, can give you a larger biological capacity than your fish will feed. The only thing any bacterial product can genuinely do is shorten the delay before your colony reaches the ceiling your stocking sets. It cannot raise the ceiling. That is a much smaller claim than the one printed on the front of most of those bottles, and it is the honest one. That gap between the claim and the reality is what costs fish their lives. A beginner who is told the tank is ready today, stocks it fully today, and a fully stocked tank produces an ammonia load that a barely present colony cannot process. Ammonia climbs across the first week. If it climbs high and fast, fish die outright. If it climbs moderately, which is more common, the fish survive an extended period of chronic exposure that damages gill tissue and suppresses immune function, and then start dying of secondary infections a month later, at which point nobody connects it to the cycle at all. The hobbyist concludes the store sold them weak fish, or that they have bad luck with that species. They were not doing anything wrong. They followed the instruction on the bottle, and the instruction was written to sell the bottle rather than to describe the biology. There's a second casualty in that sequence, and it is the one that keeps people from ever succeeding. A beginner whose first tank goes badly does not usually conclude that the advice was wrong. They conclude that fish keeping is harder than it looked and that they are not good at it. The most common outcome of a failed first cycle is not a corrected second attempt. It is a tank in a garage. And the thing that was actually missing on day one was a piece of foam that somebody 2 streets away would have handed over for nothing. So here's where to get the free version. In order of preference, the best source is mature filter media from an established healthy freshwater tank that has been running at least 3 months. A piece of foam, a handful of ceramic media, a wad of used filter floss, or an entire spare sponge filter that has been sitting in a running tank. The second best is a cup of established substrate scooped from the top layer of a mature tank, which carries a substantial colony. The third is planning ahead, which is what experienced fish keepers actually do. Drop a spare sponge into the corner of a tank you already run, leave it there for a month, and you have a fully cycled filter ready for the next tank, the next quarantine setup, or the next emergency. Where to ask is simpler than most beginners expect. Local aquarium clubs and regional fish keeping groups are full of people with mature tanks who will give media away, and independent fish stores frequently will too. That is where to get it, and this is the point where the handling decides whether any of it survives the journey. Transport, temperature, timing, and the first weeks of feeding are what separate a tank that cycles in days from one that fails entirely. The full playbook covers the complete setup sequence along with the stocking and filtration decisions that sit alongside it. The link is in the description and the top pinned comment, or scan the code on your screen and it will take you there directly. Handle the media as living tissue because that is what it is. Put it straight into a sealed bag or container of water from the donor tank. Never into a dry bag and never into tap water, because the chlorine or chloramine in tap water will kill a large share of the colony on contact. Keep it out of direct sun and out of a hot car. Get it into your filter within a couple of hours if you can, and inside 12 hours at the outside, because those bacteria require oxygen and a sealed bag of water runs out of it. Once home, put the media into the flow path of your filter, or, if it will not fit, simply into the tank in an area of good current. Then leave it alone. Do not rinse it, do not squeeze it out, do not tidy it up. Then feed the colony, which is the step nearly everybody skips. Add a source of ammonia immediately, either bottled pure ammonia with no surfactants, no detergents, and no added scent. Dose to around 2 parts per million, or a pinch of fish food left to decompose. Keep the water somewhere between the mid-70s and low 80s Fahrenheit. Keep the filter running and keep some carbonate hardness in the water, because the bacteria consume carbonate as their carbon source, and a tank that runs out of it stalls completely. Test daily. When you can dose to 2 parts per million of ammonia and read 0 ammonia and 0 nitrite within 24 hours, the tank is cycled. With good seeded media, that commonly takes somewhere between a few days and 2 weeks, against 4 to 8 weeks from nothing. Then stock in stages rather than all at once, and this matters more with seeded media than without it, because a fast cycle tempts people into a fast stocking. Add a small group of hardy fish first, wait a week, test, and only then add the next group. Every addition raises the ammonia load, and the colony needs a few days at each new level to grow into it. A tank that cycles in 5 days can still crash in week 3 if the entire stocking list arrives on the same afternoon. The seeded media bought you the head start. The stocking order is what preserves it. If you already bought a bottle, use it and do not feel misled about the purchase. Pour it in alongside your seeded media because it will not do any harm, and a proportion of these products genuinely do contain viable nitrifiers. Before you do, turn the bottle around and read the species list. If it names Nitrospira, you are holding a product formulated on current science. If it names only Nitrobacter, you now know exactly what that tells you about the formulation. And check the storage instructions because the products with living nitrifiers in them frequently require refrigeration and carry a short shelf life, which is itself the clearest signal on the shelf of which type you are holding. I want to be straightforward about the limitations because accurate information is worth more than a clean sales pitch. The first is the genuine risk, and it is the one nobody warns beginners about. Media from another tank carries whatever else lives in that tank, which can include parasites, bacterial pathogens, and pest snails. Take media only from a tank you have seen and whose keeper you trust. Avoid any tank with a recent disease history or any fish under treatment, and understand that snails are a realistic possibility. The second is that seeded media is a head start rather than a completed filter. The colony you receive is sized to the donor tank, and it will need to grow into your bioload, so stock slowly regardless of how fast your readings clear. The third is that bottled bacteria are not worthless, and I am not telling you never to buy one. If you have no access to established media, if you have no local hobbyists, or if you are dealing with an emergency, a refrigerated product from a manufacturer using the correct species is a reasonable purchase. The argument here is not that the bottle is a fraud. It is that the free option is better and almost nobody is told it exists. There is one further practical point that sits between a limitation and a warning. Seeded media does not survive being treated like equipment. It cannot be stored dry in a cupboard for next time. It cannot be left in a bucket in the garage for a fortnight. and it cannot be rinsed clean before use to make it look presentable. Every one of those things kills the colony, and each of them is a reasonable thing for somebody to do who has not been told they are holding something alive. Now here's the mistake that undoes all of this, and it is the same mistake every time. Not feeding the bacteria. Somebody collects a beautiful piece of mature media, installs it correctly, and then leaves the tank empty for a week before adding fish, because that seems like the cautious and responsible thing to do. In that week, the colony has no ammonia, and a nitrifying colony without ammonia is a herd without grass. Within a few days, it begins dying back, and by the end of the week, most of what was transferred is gone. This is livestock, and the feeding does not pause because the tank looks empty. From the moment the media goes in, there must be a continuous ammonia source, whether that is dosed ammonia, decomposing food, or fish added promptly and in small numbers. An unfed colony is a colony you threw away. None of this is new microbiology. A Russian microbiologist named Sergei Winogradsky isolated the nitrifying bacteria and described how they live in 1890, proving that an organism could build itself entirely from inorganic chemistry, which was a genuinely radical idea at the time and remains one of the foundational discoveries in the field. Every serious breeder and every commercial fish farm has moved seeded media between systems for as long as those systems have existed because it is faster, more reliable, and free. The knowledge was never hidden and never in dispute. It simply cannot be packaged, priced, or placed on a shelf, and a free piece of somebody else's filter foam has no barcode on it. If you want the complete system rather than just the cycling method, the full aquarium playbook covers the whole setup sequence from empty glass to fully stocked. The testing schedule and what each reading actually means, the stocking order that keeps a young colony ahead of its load, and the filtration choices that determine how much biological capacity you have to grow into. It is all in one place, in the order you actually need it. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment, and you can scan the code on your screen to go straight to it. And if this changed how you think about that bottle on the shelf, give it a like and subscribe, because there is a great deal more where this came from.